everybody, thank you so much for tuning in. For those watching for the first time, my name is Dan Pardo. I am a New York-based music director, arranger, and pianist, and this is Pardo's Turn, my new web series where I do a bit of song analysis from a music director's point of view, and perhaps shed a little light on what makes the gems of our musical theater canon so great. I was so excited to have the incredible Chuck Cooper on last week to discuss Old Man River. If you haven't seen it yet, I strongly recommend checking it out, and I am equally thrilled to have my friend and colleague, three-time Drama Desk nominee Nancy Anderson on today to discuss Irving Berlin's standard, What'll I Do? Nancy was last seen on Broadway in Sunset Boulevard. In addition to having roles in A Class Act and Wonderful Town, she has starred off-Broadway and in the West End and in regional productions from coast to coast. Nancy is also a master of the early American songbook, having won the prestigious Noel Coward competition, which is why I am so happy she chose this classic, first performed by Grace Moore and John Steele in Irving Berlin's Music Box Review of 1924. Set in 3/4 time, What'll I Do is a bittersweet waltz with a melody so enchanting that it probably even felt nostalgic when it first premiered. I'm going to take a look first at the verse, which I think is really smartly written. The first A section kind of rises and falls with a couple playful jumps back and forth before landing in an augmented half cadence like this. Now, any other composer would have probably just repeated those 8 bars with maybe a little variation at the end. But that's not how the song goes. That's not what Irving Berlin wrote. Instead, he starts off the same way, but then quickly pivots into the mediant key of E major before slipping back into C right before the chorus, like this. So he just had the half cadence, and he continues. Now, that sounds cool, but there has to be a reason, so let's take a look at the text, as always also written by Berlin. You must go your way and I must go mine. Or in other words, this is your key and this is my key, and from now on we have to live in separate worlds. It's pretty brilliant. The chorus, which bookends each line with the title phrase, alternates back and forth from the major tonic to this chord, borrowed from the minor mode. Now that's the parallel minor, not the relative minor. Okay, I think we need a quick theory sidebar. So relative keys have the same key signature or the same sets of notes, but opposite modes based on what the tonic or tonal home base is. So the notes A, B, C, D, E, F, and G can either be A minor or C major, depending on where you start. Conversely, the parallel keys have different key signatures or different sets of notes, but with the same tonal center, like C major and C minor. It's kind of like the musical equivalent of the upside down from Stranger Things. They are kind of similar, but one's a little darker and weirder. Now, the technique of mode mixture, which Irving Berlin uses here heavily, is when the chords a composer chooses are not only inherent to the key of the song, but also inherent to the key of its parallel minor as well. So instead of just having these diatonic chords, it can introduce chords like, and in the context of What'll I Do, it makes the difference between which is lovely, but kind of sounds like a walk in the park, and it changes it to a lot more nuanced, right? That's all a long way of saying that there's something special about that chord. It perfectly captures the feeling of the song, that feeling of when you have to give something up or let someone go, and you only have a lingering memory of what made it all so remarkable in the first place. Pair that harmonic language with the indulgent combination of these half notes and triplets, yum, ba-dum, 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 ba-ba-bum-bum, and you have a recipe for a song that still makes a lasting impact even 90 years later. Now, that's enough of that. Let's get to Nancy. So here I am with Nancy Anderson.
Hi.
When I kind of pitched this idea to you, you came up with a short list, and one that I was drawn to was What'll I Do?
Yeah, which I thought was interesting because I think that not many people would find that as interesting a song as I do in its simplicity. To me, it's a good example of how to treat period music with a modern sensibility. It's sort of the cusp. It's 1923 that What'll I Do was written, and it's the cusp of the old operetta way and the new musical theater way.
Yeah.
And what I think is interesting about that time period is that the Eastern Europeans brought with them, Romberg and Frimmel and Lehar, brought with them these flowery opera-light scores and stories about foreign kings and princesses and all this sort of thing. And it was George M. Cohan that came in and said, actually, let's make the stories about America.
So
Irving,
these two philosophies are kind of competing at the same time?
Well, it was sort of the Americanization of operetta into musicals. And Berlin shows up and kind of picks up the mantle of that, right? And he's firmly ensconced in Tin Pan Alley. And what's interesting about 1923 is that we have sort of a clear time of women's liberation. And so 1920 we have women's suffrage, and the same year we have prohibition. So it's these colliding ideas of freedom and repression. What I like about this lyric is that you'll see in a minute, she's trying to live in a sort of modern girl, modern relationship. But she's caught in between, and the music doesn't, which you'll see in a second. The music starts, the verses are operetta,
Right.
but the chorus of What'll I Do has that American melancholy that they fought and fought and fought with lots of drinking and lots of rule breaking, and then finally, boom, the crash, and we go all the way into Rodgers and Hart and Cole Porter and that true melancholy that we think of as the American songbook.
Right.
So what I like about this is that there's two things you could, it's very popular nowadays to take a song and connect it to you in the modern era, connect it to your understanding of who you are and how do you sing this song. What gives you the ability to sing period is understanding who that girl is.
Right.
And then connecting it to psychological understanding.
So when people approach music from the 20s and early 30s that kind of bridges that gap, do you think they tend to skew later or earlier in their interpretation?
I think what happens is they either do super period sound that has no soul, or they do a super modern sound that has soul to it, has heart to it, but does not honor what's written on the page.
Right.
And so the trick to period is that there is a musicality that's written on the page that needs to be honored. But we, the modern audience, also need a psychological underpinning. And there's a way to do both. Gone is the romance that once was divine. 'Tis broken and cannot be mended. You must go your way, and I must go mine. But now that our love dream has ended, what'll I do when you are far because we're so nostalgic about the sound that we cover up the heart that is banging out of every one of these songs, because at this time, you think about the flappers, and they're just shortening their hair and shortening their skirts and just trying to just break out of what came before, and the Edwardians, right? And so the heart is just trying to bang out of that chest.
I was playing for a BMI workshop on Monday, and one of the presenting composers did a piece that was kind of in the style of this era. And so often when you see music that's like this, even revivals of old material, you're not sure whether directorially it's being played with a wink or not.
Which is why you have to put yourself back in the social circumstance, because otherwise you can't figure out where these guys are coming from, and you're going to come at it from a place of judgment. Maybe a judgment of loving it. It's not a bad thing. It's just that getting underneath their skin is the interesting thing. And a lot of times we're like, oh, well, that's too classical sounding, or that's too fluttery for a modern audience. But in fact, if you don't also honor the musical style of the era, then you actually can't elucidate the lyric. You have to follow the rules first, and then see where you can break the rules and how the rules that are on the page actually inform you.
Especially with a song like this that has such a contrasting verse, as you described with the operetta. A lot of times people just won't do the verse at all.
Right.
Or they'll do it like a Gershwin verse and throw it away.
Absolutely. Yeah.
This is a cocktail lounge, there's no contrast with the meat of the chorus.
Well, and that's why it's so interesting to go back to these verses and go find what they are, and rather than writing them off immediately, you're like, what were they getting at? And then that's where, and you're right, the music asks for it. Dee-da-da-da-da, that's the operetta part. Dee, and then what'll I do? It hobbles. It has a limp. The heart is limping, and also there is a heartbeat quality. Boom, boom, go, which is, I think, why people respond to this song, even though it seems light and seems simple. Yeah. It was the musical taste of the era to have a slightly schmaltzy waltz. Because right around this time is Desert Song. What was Desert Song? 26 or something? I forget. So Desert Song is ooh, heaven and you and I, that real Strauss kind of and so the audience does want to sway. That era audience. And so that era audience needs to be led by the hand, like, okay, I'm going to take you down this road, and it's going to hurt, but you're going to like it. And so they get to sway with it, and then they get to be like, oh my God! so that's the way in which, like, the original time period really informs what the song wants to be. That's not to say if you sing it totally modern, it's not moving.
Right.
There's just another interesting, like, if you're trying to do period and trying to really get inside a period, then you have to acknowledge social history and musical styles.
Absolutely. This conversation was awesome.
Woo!
Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you.
Please like, subscribe, share, comment. Nancy, is there anything that you're working on either now or in the future that you can plug?
I'm about to go up to Auburn, New York, to the Finger Lakes Musical Theater Festival to do a new musical version of Anna Green Gables.
Oh, great.
Yeah, it's pretty nifty.
Yeah, I actually played some of those auditions.
Did you?
Yeah, but you were already cast.
Yeah, I didn't have to audition. Wait, no. I'm really excited about it. Yeah,
great.
The score is very interesting. Speaking of musical styles, Matt Vincent, who's the composer, is really into choral sounds, so he does a lot of sonic, cool stuff.
All right, well, thanks again.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Bye.
What'll I do?